Thank you so much for joining today in our free workshop. This one is on ideological subversion and the empowered social justice resources. So, in case you're curious where the screen grab comes from in the opener here, this is from a video from the 1950s that was published by the once great National Education Association before it was ideologically captured. And in this video, it was called The Freedom to Learn. There was a social studies teacher who was being castigated by her community for teaching her young people about communism, not to advance communism or promote communism, but just to understand the tenets of it. And in this video, the idea was put forth that unless we know about something, it's hard to combat it or even address it. And that's something that is relevant to today's world because we unfortunately have stopped teaching about different political systems and different ways of viewing the world and being in the world. And now we've allowed some default perspectives to be advanced as the only way to view and understand things. So this is why it's so critical that we continue to have that freedom to learn in every way and every possible interpretation of that. So for today, what we'll be talking about, and this is an informational workshop, as I had mentioned, is 3 points: ideological subversion. Then I'll speak a little bit about critical social justice, and then I'll speak about the road ahead. And as I'm speaking, I encourage all to use the Q&A button that is on your Zoom toolbar. It says Q&A. It looks like two little top bubbles talking to each other. Please drop your questions there because at the end, after I present the information, I will go into Q&A with the help of our faithful assistant, Rob, to answer some of the questions that you may be posing. So throughout, feel free to drop any question into there and we'll get to those at the end here. So first, I'd like to invite you, if you have not yet, please download the Empowered Social Justice Resources. I'm looking on my other screen here, so I can drop into the chat this message. So let's see. This is where you can download the Empowered Social Justice Resources. This outlines the guiding principles, the standards for grades K through 12, the ethnic studies framework, and a glossary, as well as some of the resources. So that's in the chat if you hadn't had a chance to take a look before this meeting. And if you missed our launch event on June 1st, where we really took a deep dive into the empowered social justice resources and where I explain the differences between a critical social justice approach and a classical social justice approach. Please do check that out. We're not going to rehash all of those things here today, but those resources are available to you, and I hope you will take a look at that video, which is posted at the site I just dropped there, along with the PDF files and other things. So the first topic I'm going to be speaking about today is ideological subversion. And I really want to give thanks to Yuri Bezmenov, also known as Thomas Schumann, and his book, Love Letter to America, which was published in 1984. And I want to do that because I think that this is a gem that many people, if they had a look into or a peek into this book, and I encourage you to get a copy of your own, and to check it out. It's available online. I think people have even made digital copies of it. But do check this out because understanding something is key to being able to address it or combat it. And we are definitely in the throes of ideological subversion in America and in other nations by critical social justice ideologues who are using this playbook and others to advance their aims. So what is ideological subversion? Bezmenov defines this as the process of changing the perception of reality in the minds of millions of peoples all over the world. So if you're just thinking to yourself, what is it? What is this topic even meaning or talking about? That's a basic understanding of it. What is involved in that process to change the perception of reality in the minds and hearts of millions of people all over the world? So when we think about this, as explained by Bezmenov, there are four components of an ideological subversion process. And we need to understand that in order to address it and to be able to effectively and efficiently address it. Something to note is that this isn't something that happens from the outside of a nation. It's not like a whole group of people, cross the border wall because the border is not secured and they're, ideologically subverting people. No, that's not how it happens. Instead, these are actors from within a nation, the nation itself. So these are nasty things that are done to America by Americans. So it's not this outside force that's coming in that you can visibly see or anything like that. You see the clock spinning here because Bezmenov explained that ideological subversion is something that takes place over time. It's a long-term process that the average person or average individual, due to their short time span of their historical memory, they're unable to perceive this process. And they're unable to perceive it as a consistent and willful effort. And that's how it's intended to be. It's intended to be like the small hand of your watch. You know it moves, but you cannot see it moving. And Bezmenov explained that there are four stages. He put these in time-bound stages, but I've decoupled it from that. So he says that there's a process of demoralization that takes place, and then destabilization, crisis, and then normalization. Today, we're going to be focusing in on the demoralization stage because that's the stage that deals with ideas, concepts, thoughts, and so forth. And that's the stage that we are currently in, where we're looking at this highest level of subversion, demoralization. We could probably spend a semester course unpacking each of the stages, but we're going to just briefly touch on so that people have a base knowledge of the process of demoralization in today's presentation. So when we think of demoralization as outlined by Bezmenov, there are three levels of demoralization: ideas, structures, and life. And I'm going to touch briefly, as I mentioned, on each of these, just so that we have an overview of the different areas that are targeted by subverters, and by people who are seeking to dismantle or destroy the ideological foundations of a nation or group. So the first is ideas. And in this section, we have things like religion, education, media, and culture. And these are important for us to understand as, elements of subversion, because these are the highest area of content that people interact with. When we undermine media and culture and education, and we make it so that we're demoralizing people in these terms, we see the elevation of like non-issues in our media. If you turn on any news setting or news program, you'll see quite a bit of that in today's world. Obsession with things that don't really matter to people. In terms of culture, elevation of celebrities and people who are promoting particular ideologies to us. Really, hero worship and celebrity worship is a big part of that as well. And in terms of our religious structures, making religion an entertainment sector. And making entertainment the sole purpose of it is one of the things that happen when ideological subverters are looking to subvert religious structures and institutions. And we see that quite a bit in many of our denominations and religious groups. Another thing that is attacked when ideological subversion is in place and we're looking to demoralize a nation or a group of people is the structures. The structures of human life, interaction, and existence are attacked. And here we see things like law and order coming under attack, social relations, our security, our internal politics, our foreign politics. But a big one that we really saw in 2020 was this attack on law and order, specifically with the defund the police movement made by many toxic groups, critical social justice groups, and Stop Cop City, and all of these other types of organizations and movements that have really sought to undermine a trust in law enforcement and to undermine a trust in law and order as a foundation for our democratic republic. In terms of social relations, having us obsess over things that don't really matter in the larger scheme of things like race and gender identity and other divisive identity politics that have really been advanced to the center of all of our social relations. So we can't even speak to one another without these constant intrusive thoughts and self-censoring and all of the other fun things that have come along with the domination of critical social justice ideologues, which is ironic because the so-called movement, started out as a resistance to the dominating structures, and it has itself become a dominating structure, critical social justice in particular. Another area that is targeted when demoralization is in process is life. All areas of life, living, healthy bodies, healthy minds. All of these things are so important when we are looking at a process of ideological subversion and demoralization in particular. I've added a couple of things into here, but as Bezmenov originally structured it, this is an attack on things like the family, society, health, race. I added in gender identity, population, labor, all of those areas being subverted, undermined, intentionally, turned upside down. Folks who've taken a look at the Black Lives Matter Global Foundation Charter and original, aims and ideas are shocked sometimes to see that the undermining of the family and the nuclear structure of the family was one of their primary goals, as stated. And they were also shocked to see that, this organization was quite proud of its foundation as a communist agitation group, openly so. They claim that they're Leninist, Marxist trained and quite proud of that. So that undermining of family and society and all societal structures is key to that. And we see that in so many ways. And I'll show some examples here in a little bit too, when we get into the next section. Really making sure that we have an unhealthy mind, unhealthy body, that we break up that connection between a child and their family. And two, really when we think about like the survival of a nation, breaking that loyalty that children have to their family and to their nation. If a child's not loyal to their family, it's going to be really hard to have them be loyal as a citizen. But what we can do is ensure that they have loyalty to the state. And that is something that communist agitators really seek to do, is break down that family and society foundation so that loyalty to the state is centered in everything. And so that people become loyal to the state. That is the victory of the final victory of communism and communist subverters. They want to undermine that concept of loyalty for nation with loyalty to the big brother welfare state who gives everything and is able to take everything away, including personal freedom from every citizen. And I really appreciate that. That's from Bezmenov's work, page 39. So check it out and read it yourself. Again, I've just given you a very brief overview and kind of rapid overview of this process, but hopefully as I'm speaking, you can start to see how we are in the throes of demoralization and have been for some time. And being able to name and understand a process is key to being able to combat it. So hopefully some useful information has been shared that can get you start to thinking about how you're seeing this process of demoralization in your community and in your community context, and things that you can do to really address it more effectively. So let's speak a little on critical social justice. Again, in our launch event on June 1st, and I have dropped the link in the chat if you missed that. I encourage you to go back and check that first event out. We really did outline in detail the differences between a critical social justice approach and a classical social justice approach. And it is important for us to understand the differences. That gives us starting points when we're examining curricula, when we're looking at what school boards are doing with their policies and practices, when we're looking at what individual teachers are doing in their classroom and trying to see, when they're talking about social justice topics, which perspective they're advancing, or if they're advancing multiple perspectives. Unfortunately, what we find in too many instances is that there's one perspective. It is the default perspective. It's even claimed ownership of the word social justice. And that's, again, something we addressed in our first webinar, and check out that link dropped in the chat there if you'd like to see that in detail. But for those who may be coming in, one thing that I really want to, and I'm going to actually come to the book because I've just read this book and it's fantastic. It's by Helen Pluckrose. And I just want to share this section with you because I think it's critical. It's what she calls the gospel of critical social justice. And if you haven't had a chance to read this book, The Counterweight Handbook, Principled Strategies for Surviving and Defeating Critical Social Justice at Work, in schools, and beyond, I strongly encourage you to pick it up. And another book that can help you understand the gospel of critical social justice is John McWhorter's book on woke racism. That was one of the early books that I read that helped me to understand how the proponents of this ideology really see themselves as an elect, and they view this in a very religious or fundamentalist way. And it's something that, as someone who seeks to advance liberal democratic values, that's deeply concerning, because under that framework there is a commitment to secularism, and that's so important. So let's just take a look. I'm reading from page 23. Critical social justice is a worldview that aims to make everything into a zero-sum political struggle around identity and the power dynamics, experiences, and knowledges believed to be tied to them. Critical social justice texts, forming a kind of gospel of social justice, express with absolute certainty the following items, and there's 7. The first is that all white people are racist. The second gospel of critical social justice is being non-racist isn't possible. Another gospel of critical social justice is that masculinity is pathological. It also asserts that sex is not biological and exists on a spectrum. Also expressed is the idea that the disbelief in the concept of gender identity is killing people. Another tenet of the gospel of critical social justice is that language is literally violence. And then finally, everything needs to be decolonized. So if you're someone who said, I want to know what this critical social justice is, I've looked at the one pager that gave me some information about how it's different from classical, but like in a nutshell, in a one slide, in a few points, thankfully, Helen Pluckrose has provided those to us now, the gospel of critical social justice. And hopefully you can see the way that race ideologies are embedded in this gospel, as well as gender identity ideologies. All of them work together to produce this zero-sum worldview of this constant political struggle around identity and power dynamics, experiences, and knowledges that these ideological zealots assert are tied to these things. So really important to understand, right? What are we dealing with so that we can effectively address it? And so the things that you're seeing in your communities, in your schools, in your religious organizations, in your civic organizations, may be guided by these fundamental gospels that people hold as truth that is uncontestable and unquestionable. So before I go on, I'd like to share how that connects to the process of demoralization. Because these tenets that are guiding critical social justice ideology are expressed and enacted and embodied by teachers and teachers' unions and educational leaders and presidents of colleges and universities. And that's why we find ourselves in the state that we're in as a nation right now. So sometimes when I do these presentations, people say, that's not really happening, or, Lee's just saying talking points of this group or that group, and these things don't really happen in schools. So I like to show some examples of the where demoralization is taking place in schools. And one of the things that Yuri Bezmenov outlines is that one of the great things of living in a democratic republic is that we allow space for a marketplace of free ideas. Unfortunately, there's no screening of those ideas in some cases, right? And I think, and this is one of the unfortunate cases. And so all ideas are able to flourish, and some take hold in the main popular culture that haven't been vetted, that aren't rooted in any evidence or reality. It's rooted in a narrative that scholar activists are trying to advance. And one of those and we often don't find out about the toxic nature of those ideas until it's too late, until it's been fully adopted by all the culture, until you see your news anchor folks referring to it, your newspapers, which are the ideological apparati of the state at this time. And you see it everywhere. And then you start to say, well, maybe there's something to that idea of white privilege that everyone keeps talking about. So here you're seeing a social media post from New York Public Schools, where the teachers are very proud to report that their fifth graders learned about white privilege and thought of examples of where this privilege lives in our daily world. And so you see the board that they're very happily sharing, saying, where do we see examples of white privilege? So it's assuming that this exists, and then we need to provide some examples of it. And how can we address it? So this being talked about with fifth graders isn't even giving them the opportunity to say, yes, I believe in white privilege, or no, I don't. A teacher standing in front of that classroom and telling them this does exist, this is what it is, and we need to think of examples of it in our world. So again, this is why it's so important for us to know what's happening in our classrooms, and what's being taught as truth and gospel, and to be vigilant about that, and to make sure that we hold our schools accountable for the practices that they enact. And I really love this counterpoint from Dr. Suzanne Verling, which was posted on X as well in response. It says, it teaches Black children that the mere sight of white persons signals their permanent systemic subjugation. Not a good way to start out in life. Imagine starting from your kindergarten class on up through your graduation time, you're taught that this thing called white privilege exists, and that it impacts you as an individual and your relations with other people. Think about how that does or does not promote goodwill in social relations. Another way that we see demoralization happening in mass education is through the permissiveness that we allow. Why are students walking out of their classrooms? I'm talking about K through 12, on up through higher ed now. And why are they protesting? Why are they doing these things? And what are they protesting? Why are they rallying? Why are they in the streets? Why are they crying out chants and using symbols that they don't even understand? Well, when you've been taught from the time you were in kindergarten about how to protest and what you need and must protest for, this is what we see. The fruits of their labors are evidence in our streets and on our college campuses at this time. And so this is from a book. These are samples, these 2 pages here that you're seeing. These are pages from a book, from a program called Woke Kindergarten. If you think that's a conspiracy or it doesn't exist, you may be sorely mistaken and saddened. But luckily, there are some independent journalists who have been looking at these programs and what's happening in schools. And there was a recent article in the San Francisco Chronicle about a Bay Area school district who was using this book and this program called Woke Kindergarten. And it was supposed to help target their most vulnerable students, the test scores, to help raise it. And the district spent so many thousands of dollars to bring these resources and books into their classrooms. And what they found was that not only did the scores of targeted students in reading and math take dismal dives, but all students dived. So this is toxic for all students. And this is a process of demoralization that is being advanced by critical social justice ideologues, unquestioningly in many cases, because people just haven't had the moral courage to go check out what's in their classroom. Do kindergartners need to be learning about queer power over fear power? Do they need to be learning about Free Palestine and Black Lives Matter and all of these other social advocacy movements? Another thing that we see with critical social justice ideology in classrooms is rampant and willful anti-Semitism. Now, you may be saying to yourself, they're not teaching about Palestine and all these things in K through 12 schools. Well, here's a sample from pre-kindergarten curriculum for K through 12. So this is a book that a teacher would read out loud to their students. And this again falls in line with the critical social justice ideology viewpoint of victims and oppressors, and the gospel that I outlined for you just a bit earlier. So let me just, in case you can't see it well on your screen, I'm going to read to you what a teacher in a pre-kindergarten classroom would be reading to their student using this program. It says, "When I was only 10 years old, I had to flee my home in Palestine. A group of bullies called Zionists wanted our land, so they stole it by force and hurt many people. My mama and I cried a lot. Palestinians call this experience the Nakba. Things keep happening today in Palestine. Children like me keep having their homes taken by the Zionist bullies. They are always scaring them and arresting them. My friends and I call this an ongoing Nakba. We want this to stop happening, so we always shout out, 'Free Palestine.'" So this is just 2 pages of the book, one of the books that's a read aloud book that's being recommended and used in American classrooms in Washington, in California, and other states. And I'm so thankful for the journalists who are pointing this out and bringing this to people's attention. You can see the historical inaccuracies in this. You can see the demonization of Jewish people and Israel in this statement, and of Zionists as well, and the use of calling groups of people bullies, and stating things that just are not accurate to the history and to the events that are taking place. So if people want to talk about certain topics, they should do it in a way that is historically accurate and that does not attempt to create activists and co-conspirators, which those working in the critical social justice ideological perspective, especially from the ethnic studies side of things, they state that is one of their aims of critical liberated ethnic studies and studies in general, is to create activists and co-conspirators. Those are not my words. Those are the words of the people who have originated this ideology and put it into classrooms. And we're seeing here again examples of how that looks. How sad that a pre-kindergarten student who hasn't even started studying geography yet, who hasn't studied the history of the world or even modern conflicts, is being taught in a very biased anti-Semitic way. Another thing in terms of the advancement of bad ideas, again, our strengths are being used against us, right? We have this free marketplace of idea. All ideas are allowed to flourish. And now we have some of these default perspectives creeping into schools, especially around gender identity. And here you're seeing, and these are tools that are used in schools. These aren't tools I've created. These are tools that are in our K through 12 schools and in our colleges and universities. One is the genderbread person. Remember that gospel tenet that was outlined by Pluckrose about gender identity being real, and that it is something that, if we don't embrace it, then lives will be lost. This is a false precept, a scare tactic, intimidation tactic. But unfortunately, in the meantime, our kindergarten through 12th grade students are being taught from the beginning that gender identity is real, and that sex is no longer relevant, that the only thing that's relevant is gender identity, and it happens on a spectrum. And so this is very toxic. And it's part of the race ideologies and gender identity ideologies that are being pushed into schools through this critical social justice approach. So when you hear your young person talking about things like gender identity and gender expression and sex assigned at birth and all these other made up and invented dehumanizing terms, and teachers think that they're being kind by talking about them, but they're actually indoctrinating students into this worldview, and without care. And it shouldn't be that way. And as parents and as fellow educators and educational leaders, we need to call our colleagues out on it and say, hey, let's chat about that. What does it really mean? What is it rooted in? And why are we talking about that with our students? How is it relevant to their reading and math achievement or other types of achievement, even the achievement of so-called social justice? Another thing that is involved in ideological subversion and that many of us early on noticed is that common words that we used to use, they suddenly have a different meaning. Words like equity, even in some of my recommendation letters for positions that I've held in the DEI field, my recommenders noted that I have a strong commitment to equity. Well, at that time, equity used to mean fairness and fairness for all. Now it means equality of outcomes, which is something completely different. So it's this constant subversion of language. Um, Language is the way that we make meaning as humans, within ourselves and between each other. And so when we start to subvert what words actually mean and what constructs and concepts are, we start to really create a world where everything that we knew previously in the past 5 years is now different. Now a teacher is someone who tells their students, like this teacher is doing, all white people are racist. That's a requirement for a teacher in K through 12 nowadays. Didn't used to be that way. Now a peaceful protest can involve beating people, burning structures down, and occupying buildings. That's peaceful protest now. Competence is measured by how much you assert that your home school supports genocide. We now understand what a woman is through a gender identity lens. What is a hero in our world? What is quote unquote affirming care? Who's an expert? All of these things. Who is even considered oppressed? All upside down. And it's very intentional in nature because if you're trying to dismantle a system and a society, you need to turn everything about it upside down and on its head and subvert the meaning of it. And so that's what's taking place with us. So just to kind of recap and wrap up, in terms of social justice foundational assertions, for those who may not have seen the previous session, who may just want a quick, rundown, we can either be doing social justice topics and teaching and learning about social justice topics through an illiberal or critical liberated lens or a liberal and empowered lens. If we're doing it from an illiberal or critical liberated perspective, what we'll see in our classroom, in our teacher trainings, in our work with our K through 12 students in the curriculum, and then the lesson plans that teachers develop, we'll see rejection of objective knowledge and truth. We'll see the idea that collective experience trumps individuality and universality. We'll see the ascribing of collective blame to dominant groups. We'll see assertions like the most oppressed deserve equal outcomes. And we'll see this cultivation in our students of pessimistic skepticism about reality today and about the progress that the nation has made. You'll see a lot of anti-American sentiment in it as well. From a liberal, empowered perspective, though, and it is possible to talk about social justice from a liberal, empowered perspective, we'll see a centering of truth, objectivity, and merit in justice. We'll see assertions of things like rights belonging to individuals, not groups. We'll see a focus on fairness and empathy. And then an idea that everyone deserves equal rights and opportunities. So that's where we start to talk about things like equal citizenship and what does it mean to belong to America and to be an American, and the importance of that in all the many groups of people and individuals who have contributed to advancing equal citizenship in America. We'll also see a cultivation of reason and compassion and a recognition of progress. Instead of saying we've made no progress, we haven't done enough, we need to turn things upside down right now and act now. We won't see that. We'll see a more measured approach, a rational approach. And that's something that makes a huge difference between an illiberal and a liberal approach to social justice. I do have a couple of links that I will share here in the chat too. These are one pagers. Let me just drop those quickly here. That says earn more. Well, let's learn more about social justice approaches in the medical and education sphere. So a couple of links there for you to a one pager if you don't have time to catch these QR codes. These are just one-page documents that you could give to a school president, a curriculum developer, a colleague, a friend, a parent, anyone who wants to know about these different ways to look at social justice. This will be useful tools to share with them. So welcoming you to share those. It's also available on the website. And then I'm going to just wrap up before I go into questions, Q&A. Keep in mind, please click on the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar, and that will give you the ability to ask some questions. So when we get to that section, I can answer and respond to some of those things that may be on your mind. So the road ahead, we really have a choice between whether we want to focus on equal opportunity or equal outcomes. Equality of opportunity is something that classical social justice perspectives advance, and equality of outcomes is something that equity-focused social justice approaches like critical social justice advances. So how do I stop this? What do I do? Lee's just sat here and she told us all about ideological subversion and how it works and gave us some examples of how we're seeing it through critical social justice education in our K through 12 classrooms and college classrooms. But what do we do? Is there just like despair? Do we just like complain and say how terrible all things are? Well, one thing that's suggested is to stop aiding the subverter. That means to stop going along with it. When you feel something off or something looks off to you, you need to start questioning it and asking questions about it. To start pushing back when policies are enacted, when practices are enacted that are rooted in the gospel of critical social justice. Start pushing back and saying, hey, is there another way to do this? Are you mandating that we do this? Do we all have to do this? Then you'll start to see the authoritarianism and the tyranny, especially as many of these aims are communist in nature. And we know what happens when communism takes hold of a nation and the death and destruction that follows. We definitely don't want that here in America. So stop aiding the subverters, start acting. What are some things you can do? You can really understand for yourself, what are liberal values to you? How does it look in your classroom, in your learning community, in your house of worship, in your civic organizations? How are those things expressed or not expressed, or even subverted in the current world? So this is again coming from the work of Helen Puckrose and James Lindsay. Another book, Social Injustice. It's an abridged version of a previous book that was quite thick. This condenses it down, so I encourage people to take a look at it and to ruminate and act on what liberal values are to you. This involves things like democracy, limited government, a separation of church and state, universal human rights, respecting for the value of differing opinions and honest debate, thinking about freedom of expression and practicing and speech, having limited government and equality for women, racial minorities, and LGBT people. So those are some of the core values. And as I mentioned, this Empowered Social Justice Program is rooted in liberal values. When we're thinking about teaching from about liberal democratic values in the American context and why it's so important for our history, civics, and social studies classes to be emphasizing liberal democratic values instead of critical social justice values, it's crucial. This is when we're centering things like the right to private property, which all communists oppose, the pluralistic system of Political parties and organization, again, opposed by those who want to advance a critical social justice or neo-Marxist ideology, equality before the law, equal citizenship, consent of the governed, independence of our branches of government, and respect for individual rights and fundamental freedoms. And again, you can check out the sources of that and why is it so important for us to have free and fair elections. These are things that are not taught in our schools right now because instead we're focusing on critical social ideology, critical social justice ideology, and the undermining of all of the principles and values that have lended to this great American experiment. Liberalism is super important. And I want to emphasize and stress that this is not about the political right or the political left in America. Liberalism belongs to all Americans. I love this quote. It's again from Pluckrose's work, just recently published. While liberals on either side of the political spectrum may disagree on economic issues and other issues of policy, they are united in their support for individual liberty, common humanity, freedom of belief and speech, the value of viewpoint diversity, and the need for consistent principles in which the same rules and freedom apply to everyone. So this doesn't belong to the left or the right or Republicans or Democrats. This belongs to all Americans on any side of the political spectrum. And the empowered social justice are rooted in liberal democratic values and seek to promote and advance liberal democratic values. If you haven't had a chance, I did drop it in the chat earlier to download the empowered social justice resources. In this document, it is outlined the guiding principles that educators' attitudes and practices that they'll need to cultivate in order to work from an empowered social justice perspective. Also included are the empowered social justice standards for grades K through 12. These are a counterpoint to the Southern Poverty Law Center social justice standards, which are literally critical social justice standards wrapped up in a student-facing way that promote all of the gospels of critical social justice that I previously outlined. If you don't want that in your schools and you want an alternative to be allowed and promoted, encourage your school board members and teachers unions and teacher organizations to begin to open up and to have various different ways of approaching not only social justice topics, but also ethnic studies. And you'll hear some of these ideologues, they're very brazen and self-righteous. They claim that the critical liberated way of teaching is the only way to teach. It's the authentic way to teach. And all of that is just more bullying, scare tactics, and intimidation and silencing of people so that they feel like I can't question this expert, who's here. They're telling me there's only one way and one authentic way. There's many ways. And we need to start embracing what are our values and what are we seeking to do in our classroom and learning spaces, and to have curricula that is informed by those ideologies that we select. And we need to be more intentional and transparent about the ideologies that we are embodying and enacting in our classroom spaces. Another thing that's there is the glossary and the resources, of course, which are just a collection of various resources that can be used to learn about the over 40 groups of people who have contributed to equal citizenship and e pluribus unum in the United States of America. There are some touchstone texts that are outlined in the resources that I encourage. First, teachers need to get familiar with them, and then you'll be able to share these things with your students and develop lesson plans and learning experiences for students to be able to better understand. So first, we need an understanding of what are liberal democratic values. And I encourage teachers to get familiar with the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man, the American Convention on Human Rights, and the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Those are great sources to use to get an understanding of liberal democratic values. Another thing that if we're going to speak about and talk about race in our classrooms is for teachers to better understand the contested nature and history of racial classification and race and ethnicity in America. And to do that, you have to study up on it. You have to go beyond what you've been taught in your teacher training program. You have to go beyond what your teacher union is promoting, which likely, if it's one of the larger ones, has been ideologically captured and is advancing a critical social justice perspective. And you have to actually unlearn some of the things that you've learned and that have been taught to you as truths. This is a process I had to engage in under fire when I was being attacked for really trying to help people understand what is anti-racism and where these race ideologies come from and what are they. I was told I was leading people to danger by doing that. And we all need to lead ourselves into a little bit of dangerous thinking and unpacking of what is racial classification and how does it function. So I suggest you take a look at Classify: The Untold Story of Racial Classification in America by David E. Bernstein to get a better understanding of how anti-Semitism works in so many of our school settings. I suggest another David L. Bernstein, in his book, Woke Anti-Semitism. Another book to take a look at is The Arc of a Bad Idea: Understanding and Transcending Race by Carlos Hoyt. Again, things we need to understand in order to effectively engage and really promote the freedom to learn about race and ethnicity if we want to teach about that when we're teaching about social justice topics. And another thing is to understand that there are different ideologies of race. And here I'm just providing three that are some of the most pervasive ones that we may find that our students may have been exposed to, that community members may have been talking about, that you may have seen in your teacher education program or not. But if we are really going to provide a well-rounded understanding of race and exploration of it and social justice, we need to understand that there are different ways of viewing race. So I encourage teachers to read and have their students read books and selections from anti-racist ideology, books and selections from colorblind ideology, and books and selections from raceless ideology. I think that one's being renamed to the Togetherness Wayfinder ideology. It's a raceless ideology, same as it was. So I encourage you to take a look at those and to have your students to use those as touchstone texts to unpack and analyze different movements for equal citizenship and different social justice topics and ideas. Another thing that we have provided through the resources is various instructional tools that are recommended for using an empowered social justice approach. So you'll see those in the document. I won't unpack them here. We have future webinars where we'll be talking about these topics as well. And I encourage you, today is our first free workshop. We have 4 free workshops for the summer. One is going to be on, well, today's is on ideological subversion. The next one will talk and get in detail about the guiding principles and the attitudes and practices that teachers are encouraged to engage with in order to work from a more empowered social justice approach. On July 24th, we'll be talking about the standards and the resources. And on that one, please keep in mind, the standards are for K through 12 education. They're a counterpoint to the Southern Poverty Law Center standards. But they are not limited to that. And actually, I have some folks in higher education settings who are going to be using empowered social justice to challenge their curriculum review process and course review processes to broaden the lens of ideologies that are used to make ethnic studies, gender studies, women's studies, American studies, and all the other studies programs, and also to teach civics and U.S. history. So just check those out. And then the last session on the 7th will be on teaching ethnic studies in particular, and how you can transform and take the dehumanizing aspects out that are in the critical liberated approach. I also offer customized workshops, trainings, and consultations. So please do check those out as well on drtlee.com. And I'd like to say thank you at this point. And to invite in, I believe it's Mr. Rob is here with us to help me manage this Q&A.
You bet. Thanks, Dr. Lee. I appreciate it for sure. All right. One question we have here is, can you recommend some books for me to better understand critical social justice and how to fight it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it? I didn't it faded out for me for a second there.
I apologize. The question is, can you recommend some books for me to better understand critical social justice and how to fight it?
Yes. Let me I'm just pulling from my okay, so one that I mentioned that I just keep handy, Woke Racism, How a New Religion Has Betrayed Black America by John McWhorter is a really good one. Um, this is one that really helped me when I was in the deep rabbit hole of the California Community College system. It's Counter Wokecraft, a field manual for combating the woke in the university and beyond. It's by Charles Pincourt and James Lindsay. It was released on my birthday on one of the years that I was stuck in a nightmare of dealing with critical social justice ideologues, and I didn't quite know who was surrounding me and what. This other one that I think I cited from it earlier from Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay, Social Injustice. This is the abridged version by Rebecca Christensen of their Cynical Theories book, which is a huge book. You can see this is a thinner book. And, just a quick update. And then the most recent from Helen Pluckrose is the Counterweight Handbook, Principal Strategies for Surviving and Defeating Critical Social Justice at Work, in Schools, and Beyond. And this, again, is by Helen Pluckrose. Excellent book that is highly recommended for folks who just want to, really understand critical social justice ideology and to sharpen and better understand what are your values. Are you aligned with that critical social justice ideology? If so, great. Then you have a better understanding of those who may be questioning it and saying, there's other ways to look at these topics and do this work besides just the quote one way or the quote authentic way. Those are also words that help when someone's trying to dominate a space and tell you what to do and how to do and how to teach. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Okay, and now I have another question here that says, this is great, but I am not a teacher or in education, but I want to stop this social justice critical stuff in my community. Sorry, what can I do?
Okay, so I got that it was they want to know what to do to address critical social justice in their community.
Correct, yes, they're not in education, so.
Oh, okay, so yeah, um, these workshops are really focused on like teachers and educators, and because that's who I am and what I do. But I realize that folks are tuning in who may not be educators and who may, just be parents or guardians or community members or family members with young people in school. And this welcome to you as well. And thank you for wanting to learn more about it. I feel like the more we learn about it is something that really helps us to better understand what's happening around us. Um, in terms of things that you can do, this book that I held up, the Counterweight Handbook, the new release from Helen Pluckrose, I strongly recommend this book because not only does it outline some of the claims of critical social justice ideologues and ideology and counterpoints to it, which are so important when you're trying to understand something and unpack it. It does it more in a way that you can read it on your own and put your notes in the margin and, dog ear your pages, or if there's any librarians, I'm not suggesting people do that, but I'm just saying, however you digest material and interact with it, it allows you to do that in a book format. And not only that, but in her book, Pluckrose provides several templates that can be used to write letters. I just want to highlight some of them because I thought it was outstanding. So if you need to get a start on how to write a letter objecting to mandatory gender pronoun declaration, A letter objecting to ideologically biased readings on race. How do I write a letter objecting to the support for radical political movements in public organizations? How do I write a letter objecting to affinity groups or other racial segregation practices? Very many different things of the practices and policies that have been advanced by critical social justice ideology. This book provides some sample letter templates because sometimes it's just, I want to get a letter out to someone, but I don't know what to say, or I don't know what to do. And so this gives you some talking points if you want to go make statements at, government or educational bodies to rein them in from, the dominance of critical social justice ideology. Or also a letter that you could send off, with a couple of peers or friends, not working alone or in isolation, finding like-minded people is key. And so I think that some of the suggestions that are provided in this book in particular, along with the templates, give you a jump start that you could use to begin to challenge, question, and demand accountability. So I think that that's critical for people. So I hope that that is helpful and that you can check those out along with the upcoming resources and so forth.
Thanks again, Dr. Lee. And then I have another question here. How can we help minimize the mis and disinformation being promoted and disseminated on social media?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a hard problem there. What was that?
I apologize. How can we help to minimize the mis and disinformation being promoted and disseminated on social media?
Well, social media, again, it's one of those things about the free marketplace of ideas and using our strengths against us. Some of the ideologues have really taken to using social media to spread misinformation and disinformation. And it's something that we have to grapple with and deal with. I suggest getting on to those platforms and addressing the misinformation and disinformation when you see it. Some platforms have features in them that can help the community to kind of keep things on the up and up. I know on X, I don't use these platforms very much, but I know on X, they do have a community notes that you can contribute to and call people out when things are just inaccurate and so forth. So I encourage people to get involved. Don't just be a spectator. If you see misinformation and disinformation out there, check it out and challenge it. Read up on some of the claims that are made and some of the counterpoints that you could be making and start to make them. Have the moral courage to stand there and to stand up and say something's wrong or something seems off, or I just have a question and I want to better understand someone's perspective. Those are things that we haven't done as much as we should have, but I see so many more people starting to do it, and it really just warms my heart and makes me happy to see people really coming into their moral courage and realizing that we're all in this together, and we can't just let the extremists on the right or the left take over things and ruin everything we've built. Are there more
Okay,
questions?
thank you, Dr. Lee. I have one final question here. And it's long, so just give me a moment here. It says, I appreciate your suggestion of gently pushing back and asking, is there another way to do this, etc. However, something I observed is that one is met with the mechanism for that, namely we are centering whiteness when discussion or debate is called in. And the point of this work is to decenter whiteness. And whiteness is not about skin color. See your case, Coleman Hughes, John McWhorter, Roland Fryer. It's about dismantling capitalism. Our very questions, invitations show that you have to do the work, and the group members join in muting you out, so they show that they are doing the work. Sorry. And a struggle session emerges. How can we create a movement where we can actually facilitate group action as opposed to one individual?
Okay, I heard a lot of different points in there. And I heard mention about decentering whiteness and how that is doing the work and so forth. one of the big things that you can do is push back on that assertion. That is an assertion. It's part of, and I believe rightly so, what Helen Pluckrose calls the gospel of critical social justice ideology. And it's faulty. It's not rooted in anything except for a narrative that some socialists have gotten together to develop a worldview that is now being pressed on everyone, that used to be marginalized to, ethnic studies, gender studies, women's studies departments on campuses. Fringe campus culture has now become mainstream campus culture. And it's something that we need to push back on. We need to call it out when we see it. When we see the tenets of critical social justice being expressed as fact that must not be questioned, that's when we need to challenge their status as fact. And we need to lean into science and reason, and data, and secularism, and all of the components of liberal democratic values, to say, no, what you're saying is not the gospel truth. It is not something that is untouchable or unquestionable. We are human beings. We have questions. They're valid. And it's a good thing for us to have that. And that's something that we will choose to do and to ask and to question about. And we're going to say no to dogma, and no to people who tell us we're not allowed to question or to, interrogate when ideas are put forth as the truth and the only truth. So I think that that's something that's critical for us to do, and to do it not just by yourself, but to engage, like-minded people who may have questions, but to lack the moral courage to answer, and so forth. So this is more a bottom-up approach than a top-down. Although we have to contest both with the policies and the top-down as well. We have to do both at the same time in order to counter what's taken decades for these scholar activists to build up, while everyone was sitting back and being kind and compassionate, and allowing them to railroad all of us into the nightmare that we find ourselves into now. I hope that's helpful. Are there other questions? I know we have a 2 o'clock, but if you have others, I'm happy to, if I can quickly answer them, hopefully.
Yeah, we do. We have another question here. And that is, why is the choice for equality a castle? The other side says we want more house, material things than we deserve. A more modest, good outcome might be more like what we are seeking. Is there a reason for a castle?
I think that must be referring to the graphic where it's outlining, do we want equality of outcomes or equality of opportunity? And I really like that graphic and that metaphor, because it does show the difference between the two. As you see, equity leads us to the bowels of hell. It leads us to communism. It leads us to redistribution of things that people have worked hard and earned. It leads us to communist systems that lead to death, famine, and destruction whenever they are enacted in a nation. Look at history and know it. And so that's what I have to say about that graphic. And equality of opportunity is a much more noble goal to work towards, that we have not achieved. As some of the equity proponents will tell you, we don't focus on equality because all that matters is equity. Wrong. We still have work to do here on equal citizenship in America, and on equality of opportunity. And we're going to continue to do that work. And we're not going to embrace nihilism and destruction of America and capitalism to do it.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Another question here. How do I approach the top school boards, et cetera, to advocate for teachers to teach liberalism? In other words, not fighting back against any incident or text, but advocating for training teachers to teach liberalism. We are in a very white liberal town. Teachers are terrified to push back. Parents need to help.
Yes. So that, it sounds like you're advocating for more viewpoint diversity in the approaches. And something that's important to note, from my perspective, now people may take your work and do different things with it. That's one of the dangers of a scholarship, if you will. But from my perspective, what I'm seeking to do is not make it so that no one can teach critical social justice or anything like that. I'm trying to just broaden the lens of viewpoint diversity in our K through 12 settings and in our college settings. I want a teacher to be able to choose to teach from a critical social justice perspective or from a classical social justice perspective. And I want both of those teachers to have equal protection in doing so. And right now, we don't have that kind of setting. We have a setting where critical social justice ideologues are telling everyone that their way is the only way. You must teach ethnic studies and focus only on 4 ethnic racial groups. You must assert that gender identity ideology is real. You must assert that race is a social construct and is real. And all of the musts are things that get me very concerned as a teacher who is committed to liberal democratic values and the principles of that, which involve having the ability to choose and having viewpoint diversity in a learning environment. Not a setting where we have the other foot, right? And where we're now in power as critical social justice ideologues, and we're going to push out anyone who doesn't agree with us lockstep through DEI statements, through DEI policies, through curriculum and instruction that is rooted only in a critical social justice ideology. That's problematic. That's where I start to have concerns and issues, and so do others, rightly so. And how do you push back? You go to school board meetings. You make relationships with your school board members. You talk to them about these various things and why it's problematic that only one viewpoint is being promoted and suggested. You talk to them about the danger of believing these DEI consultants who come in and tell us that there's an authentic or only one way to teach a subject, and the way that takes away and diminishes the craft of teaching and the autonomy of teachers and academic freedom of teachers as well. It's important that we protect the rights of people to believe in critical social justice ideology or to disbelieve in it. Both need to exist and coexist. And right now we don't have conditions like that. So we need to keep pushing until we get a balance back. And that means engaging those top level officials, those decision makers who oversee budgets of public funds. That's our money, not theirs. And we need to ensure that one ideology isn't being pushed over another, and that if it is, that we have full transparency of that and people are being held accountable for that and the impacts it's having, not just on the academic development of students, but the social development of students, because so many of the things that are happening are developmentally toxic, harmful, and inappropriate. And true educators who have an understanding of pedagogy and instruction and curriculum development need to start speaking up and having the moral courage to speak up and ask for that viewpoint diversity and the choice, the freedom to learn for all of us. So I hope that's helpful. And I think we've gone a little bit over here.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. We have gone a little bit over here. Now I do have a couple more questions. Do we have time for a couple more?
Well, what I'd like to do is, if we can, put them onto our next session, because we're about 10 minutes over, and I want to respect and value time of the attendees as well as my own time. So if we can do that, I'll be happy to do that and to put them onto queue for next session.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Lee. I appreciate your time, as do the folks that came.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, everyone, thank you again. I hope you'll join us. Let me just flip back here to our next session on July 10th, where I'll be unpacking and leading through some guided reflections on the guiding principles. How do we revise the way that we approach these topics and the practices that we use? So again, thanks so much. And I will see you all at the next free workshop. Bye for now, everybody.